Greetings all, D&Disability here. Just a, slightly longer video this week, stretching my legs, seeing and really discussing what there is to say about VTTs, right? Virtual tabletops. What is a VTT? Let's start there, right? Virtual tabletops have kind of taken the internet by storm over the past, decade, and definitely since COVID. Here is an example from my Temple of Elemental Evil game from several years ago, with my players, and it was a mixed bag, but it's enough to demonstrate the point that while VTTs are useful tools, right? We can have maps, we can share and update information kind of automatically. I can reveal certain bits of information, such as these maps are hidden while these maps up here are visible. We can even have online dice rollers and online character sheet management, online rules management. All of these things, for many, are a positive, right? But in my experience, not so much, right? These drop-down menus are not visually friendly. They are not often accessible. These images, right, are completely illegible, for want of a better phrase, to me, right? The text isn't great, and even when I use my software that gives me this kind of view, that gives me this zoomed in view where I can start to manipulate the grid with these elements. And I've just picked these uploaded maps as a random example. You could do this anywhere with this program, right? But at the same time, I'm now only focused on that one little bit. Same with if I zoom in and say scroll over here, right? Now I'm only focused on this one little bit. Maybe I can move this character around. And even then, to me, these characters aren't often visible, right? This one, sure, easy. She's nice and red, nice, cute little anime girl figure, but not all of them are. What about this one here, sitting in the back corner, right? What about this one? There should be a character right there, or at least I thought there was a character right there, but there isn't. And, maybe that one's one, but no, those aren't. So, visual elements aside, right, both setting aside the problems I have with interacting with these kind of characters, low vision circumstances, or interacting with the kind of background DM stuff that work, right, that DMs have to do behind the scenes, right? Even then, for me, as a DM, this is often a lot more work. Thankfully, these files, right, were available online. All I had to do was upload them, drag them in. I could purchase them. But when it comes to making my own maps, at least to this kind of standard, which players do come to expect if you're using a VTT after a while, that personally is too much for me. So the accessibility is one problem. Another problem is that many VTTs, including Roll20, are not available on a mobile platform, right? Roll20 used to be, but is no longer, at least that I'm currently aware. So when you have players that play from their cell phone or from a tablet, right, they might struggle with the VTT format. So if VTTs are not the answer for me, what do I do? Well, this, right? I use entire theater of the mind-based gaming, pretty much. I'll bring in the occasional image or the occasional map or reference point. I run my game off a hex map. But as the players adventure, as the players move through dungeons or clear out areas, it's assumed their characters are mapping, or they specifically state that their characters are mapping the dungeon. And if they are, and if they are taking the extra time to do so, and they've discovered, pretty much everything, I don't mind making a small map like this and revealing to them, okay, this is what you know, right? This is as far as this northeast hallway goes, right? It continues on farther, but you don't know how far. You have an idea of where these doors are, and yes, one might argue that I should not be giving away the room number information, but I'm too lazy to edit that out. And if my players look down at this and go, wow, there are 28 rooms in this dungeon, for them, that's an incentive, right? I've never had a player be like, wow, there's 28 rooms in this dungeon. It's, why? Why do we have to have that information, right? It's always been, wow, okay, we've explored 10 rooms, now let's see the rest, right? Let's work on finding the rest. Particularly when you deal with multiple floor dungeons, like my party is starting to do. That's not as common anymore in the 5th edition era of small, tight dungeon design, right? We don't have these great, big, sprawling affairs. Here's another one. And for those of you who watched my video last week, right, you would recognize both of these clips. These are both clips from a dungeon that the party's currently exploring through. So if my players watched my previous video, they got some, what you would call, exclusive previews, right? But nonetheless, after it's been, 5 weeks or so, I think, since they've actually seen this map, because their characters went off and did some other stuff outside of the dungeon. Predominantly sell loot, level up, that kind of thing. But they now have this map that they can return to when they get back into this dungeon. They know where they've been mostly. They know what was in these rooms. And this is still information their characters would have had. And this is one way I get around the virtual tabletop problem. I send them screen grabs, just direct copy paste, snipping tool clips from my maps. Eventually, they get something like this that's kind of pieced together, where I take all the disconnected clips and I sandwich them together back into a whole image. And overall, right, this has helped my players a lot, particularly those who are challenged with mapping in person. Not all players are acute enough or three-dimensionally cognitively aware enough, right, to do these kind of mappings based on verbal descriptions, particularly when we deal with players with disabilities, right? In Bill's game, the Dungeon Delver's game on Tuesday, I am continually lost by dungeon descriptions, typically. I cannot keep them straight. And I believe that if I cannot keep them straight as a player, why should I expect my own players, when I'm a dungeon master, to keep these details in orientation? So now, if we've turned away from VTTs and I've shown you how I handle my maps, let's talk about digital character sheets. So here is my character sheet from the Dungeon Delver's game, live streamed on Tuesdays. And we have here all of the key information that I need right up front. My ability scores, my saving throws. Down here, my hit points, my armor class. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons uses a descending armor class, for those of you who are confused. And then we're getting into minor notes about my character. And I find that digital character sheets are more accessible, but in juggling too many of these things, in juggling too many of these windows, we might get lost. I get lost quite often when it comes to having, say, this window open and a book open and my images open and my Discord open and everything else, right? And some VTTs are good about managing that, others aren't. Some VTTs, like Roll20, have complete character sheet updaters where you don't have to worry about doing any of this weird fiddly stuff. Like, if my strength is a 17, what does that mean my, Ben Barslick Gates roll is? All right, you don't have to go consult a book. You can just enter in the number and it'll give you that stuff automatically, which is awesome. But that's assuming you have the hardware. Even someone just playing D&D on their phone can open a Google Doc with this kind of sheet, edit it, and move on, right? Or just take physical notes, as many of my players do. VTTs, they're not all bad, right? They're not all good. They are an amazing tool for players, for DMs, and they often, right, are receiving great praise right now because they bring the in-person game table experience to players digitally. And this is awesome. Should they replace physical in-person gaming? I don't think they should. There is far more that gets lost when it comes, particularly when it comes to players with disabilities, those with autism, or say are neurodivergent, or with ADHD, or simply players that want to have crosstalk, side conversations while the game is going on. These little things, physical cues, physical cues as in nonverbal cues, right? Small side conversations, the ability to just silently point to something and have another player pass you a book, or, gesture and, as a way of asking for a pen. These can be lost in a digital gaming environment. Same with, as well, those who use sign, those, whether you are deaf or mute, and though they do not consider themselves part of the disabled community, these challenges still can creep up with players in the virtual gaming space. So, how can we negotiate this? What can we do? Hopefully this video has shown you, or at least given you a couple of things to think about, right? What can we do? Well, the point is to use what tools are easiest for you. Use, whether it is a virtual tabletop or just a simple snipping tool that comes with any computer, to grab images or grab parts of maps, to use those maps, right? Give players the option to ask for help with their character sheets, or get the help they need. Often, particularly with mapping or game experiences, it's not a player experience thing. Somebody could play this game for a decade and still not understand how a mechanic works. That doesn't make them a bad player. It just means that it doesn't click in their head, right? This isn't an issue of experience. This is an issue of what we call spoons, and having enough and spending enough of your spoons, in other words, to actively engage with the game. So my ending question here, right, is, so question of the week: how do you stop players from talking over each other, or all at once, when you game online with a virtual tabletop or otherwise? Leave your comments down below.